The oppressive silence of the great hall pressed in on Elara, a physical weight that stole her breath. Marble columns, carved with the history of the Stonehand lineage, soared to a vaulted ceiling far above her head. Each echo of a cough, each rustle of a cloak, amplified her terror. She stood on a raised dais, not as a guest, but as a spectacle, a trembling mouse caught in the gaze of 1,000 predatory eyes. King Theron Stonehand, a figure of granite and raw power, sat on his obsidian throne, his expression unreadable, yet radiating an undeniable sternness that curdled Elara's blood. Elara Meadowlight, Councillor Valerius Thorne's voice, smooth as polished river stones, cut through the tension. He stood to the king's right, a silk-clad viper in human form, his smile a thin, cruel line. You stand accused of the gravest treason, the theft of the royal moonstone, an artifact sacred to our kingdom, a beacon of our Alpha's might. A gasp rippled through the assembled court. Elara's hands, calloused from tending herbs, twisted in the rough fabric of her simple tunic. "I did not," she whispered, her voice barely a breath against the enormity of the accusation. "I swear upon the ancestors, I have never even seen the moonstone." Valerius chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that sent a shiver down Elara's spine. A convenient claim, from a common herbalist found lurking near the royal chambers, just hours after the theft. Your innocence rings hollow, girl. He gestured to a guard who held aloft a small, intricately carved wooden box. This was found amongst your meagre possessions. A key, Elara. A key that fits the royal chambers according to the royal locksmith. Panic flared in Elara's chest, hot and suffocating. "That's not mine. I've never seen that box, or that key. Someone must have planted it." King Theron's deep voice rumbled, cutting through the rising murmur of the court. "Silence!" The single word resonated with authority, silencing every tongue. His gaze, sharp as obsidian shards, landed on Elara. "Do you deny the key was found with your belongings, Elara Meadowlight?" "I deny it was mine, Your Majesty," Elara pleaded, her eyes wide with desperation. "I do not know how it came to be there." Theron leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on his knees. "And the moonstone itself, girl? Where is it?" Elara's head swam. "I don't know. I swear I don't know anything about it." The sheer injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her. She was a simple herbalist, tending to her garden and her patients, far removed from the machinations of the court. Valerius stepped forward, his expression dripping with feigned sorrow. "Your Majesty, her denials are as transparent as river glass. The evidence is undeniable. The royal moonstone is gone, and this girl was found with the means to access the chambers, and no plausible explanation." He cast a pitying, yet condemning glance at Elara. "It is a clear act of defiance against your rule, a direct assault on the very heart of the kingdom." King Theron's jaw tightened. He looked at Elara, then back at the councillors, his gaze sweeping over the assembled nobles. There was no flicker of doubt in his eyes, only a grim resolve. "The theft of the royal moonstone is an act of war against this kingdom," he declared, his voice echoing with the weight of his pronouncement. "Such treason cannot go unpunished." He rose from his throne, a towering figure that commanded absolute attention. "Elara Meadowlight, for your egregious crime against the crown, I sentence you to the execution pit." A collective gasp, louder this time, filled the hall. The execution pit, a place of legend and terror, reserved for only the most heinous of crimes, where the king's personal wolf, a beast of immense size and fury, delivered the ultimate justice. Elara's knees buckled, her breath hitched, a strangled sound of pure horror. Her blood ran cold, then pulsed with a frantic beat that threatened to burst her veins. Two burly guards, their faces impassive, seized Elara by the arms. She didn't struggle, her body frozen by a terror so profound it stole all capacity for movement. They dragged her roughly from the dais, past the gaping faces of the court, past Valerius Thorn's triumphant smirk. The polished marble floor blurred beneath her feet as they propelled her through a heavy oak door and down a winding, torchlit corridor. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something primal and wild. They reached a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by flickering torches mounted high on the walls. In the center, a gaping maw of darkness, a circular chasm stretched before her, the execution pit. A low growl, deep and resonant, vibrated through the very stones of the chamber, sending a fresh wave of icy fear through Elara. It was the sound of the Alpha King's wolf, a creature of legend, an enforcer of justice, or, in her case, an instrument of execution. Her stomach lurched. The guards pushed her to the very edge of the pit, the rough stone biting into her bare feet. She peered into the abyss, seeing nothing but impenetrable blackness, yet feeling the immense presence of the creature within. Its breathing, a raspy intake of air, filled the silence, growing louder, closer. "No, please," Elara choked out, her voice raw with desperation. "I'm innocent. I didn't do it." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. With a brutal shove, the guards propelled her forward. Elara cried out, a sound of pure terror, as the ground vanished beneath her. She tumbled into the dark, a sickening rush of air tearing past her ears. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of impending doom as she plunged into the unknown, toward the waiting fangs of the Alpha King's beast. The wolf's bow. The stone floor surged towards Elara, the air thick with the coppery tang of dread and the acrid smoke of torches that barely pierced the pit's gloom. Her heart, a frantic bird, battered against her ribs. She braced for impact, for tearing claws and gnashing teeth, squeezing her eyes shut, a silent plea for a swift end escaping her lips. But instead of crushing stone, an unexpected earthy warmth enveloped her, the scent of pine needles and damp soil filling her nostrils. She landed with a jarring thud, yet on something yielding, not the unforgiving ground. Her eyes snapped open. Towering above her, a monstrous silhouette against the flickering light from above, was the beast. Far larger than any wolf she'd ever imagined, it was a creature of pure shadow and formidable muscle. Its fur, black as a moonless night, seemed to devour the surrounding light, intensifying its fearsome presence. Yet, it was the eyes that truly captivated her. Two fiery orbs, burning with an intense, almost intelligent crimson. This was no mere animal. This was Shadow, the Alpha King's legendary wolf, guardian of the Stonehand lineage, a creature whispered to possess ancient wisdom and a primal connection to the very soul of the kingdom. Elara lay splayed in the pit, her breath catching, paralyzed by a terror that was both awe-inspiring and utterly petrifying. Shadow's massive head lowered, its hot breath stirring the stray hairs around her face. She felt the vibration of a low growl deep in its chest, a sound that resonated in her bones, a primordial chord struck in the pit's silence. Every instinct screamed for escape, for a futile fight, or simply to vanish. Still, she remained motionless, locked in the gaze of those burning red eyes. Then, the impossible occurred. Instead of lunging, instead of tearing, Shadow lowered its magnificent head further, pressing its snout gently against her shoulder. It was not a menace, nor a challenge, but a soft, insistent nudge. A low, mournful whine escaped its throat, a sound startlingly incongruous with the beast's fearsome appearance. It nudged her again, its surprisingly soft fur brushing her cheek. Above, the entire palace, which had hummed with morbid anticipation, fell into an unnatural, absolute silence. The crackle of torches, the distant murmur of the crowd, the very air seemed to hold its breath. King Theron, who had watched with stern, unyielding eyes, now stood frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. His jaw, usually set in resolute authority, hung slightly agape. Chancellor Thorne, whose lips still bore a smirk of triumph moments before, now resembled a statue carved from fear and disbelief, his eyes wide and fixed on the scene below. Shadow nudged Elara one last time, a prolonged, almost tender push. Then slowly, majestically, it lowered its massive body. Its front legs bent, its head bowed, until its snout nearly touched the dirt floor. It was an unmistakable, unequivocal gesture. The alpha wolf, the beast of legend, the king's fiercely loyal companion, had bowed to her. Elara, still unable to grasp the impossible tableau, felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a sensation entirely separate from fear. It was a connection, ancient and profound, stirring within her. The world had inverted, and in the fiery eyes of the beast, she saw not death, but something else entirely, recognition. King Theron's voice, when it finally shattered the silence, was a raw, guttural command, stripped of all regal composure. "Remove her! Get her out of there, now!" His gaze, no longer cold and condemning, was a maelstrom of shock, confusion, and a dawning, terrible realization. "And secure her in my private wing. I want answers, and I want them tonight." The guards, still reeling from the unbelievable display, moved with clumsy urgency, lowering the rope into the pit. Shadow rose then, its fiery eyes sweeping over the guards with a possessive glint, a low growl rumbling in its chest, a clear warning. It watched as Elara, still in a daze, was helped onto the rope, and slowly, carefully, hoisted back up to the bewildered court. As she ascended, her eyes met King Theron's, and in their depths she saw not the judgment of a king, but the nascent spark of a dangerous question. A royal sanctuary. The king's roar wasn't born of fury, but a chilling concoction of shock and an unyielding command. "Guards, get her out, now!" The words scythed through the court's stunned silence, jolting the armoured figures who'd stood frozen, spears lowered, eyes wide with disbelief. Two guards, faces pale beneath their helms, fumbled to uncoil a thick rope from a nearby rack. Its coarse fibres slapped against the stone as it descended into the pit. Elara, still quivering, watched its slow drop. Shadow remained a warm, solid anchor beside her, his massive head nudging her hand again. A low rumble in his chest, once a sound of menace, now resonated with a strange, burgeoning comfort. Her fingers, raw, tightened on the rope as she began the arduous ascent. Above, The guards hauled with frantic energy, their gazes flitting between her and the motionless wolf below. As she cleared the pit's edge, strong hands took her, not roughly, but with an unexpected, almost reverential gentleness. Her legs, stiff and bruised, threatened to give way, but they steadied her. The court's eyes tracked her every movement, whispers like rustling dry leaves beginning to stir. "To my private wing," Theron commanded, his voice a low growl edged with steel. "No one speaks to her. No one approaches. She is under my direct protection." His gaze swept over his counsel's bewildered faces, a silent dare to object. Not a soul stirred. Alara was half carried, half escorted through a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, away from the grand hall's judging eyes. The air grew warmer, scented with cedar and something subtly masculine. Stone gave way to thick woven rugs that muffled their steps. She registered the hushed urgency in the guards' movements, their avoided gazes, yet their peculiar deference. They reached a heavy, ornate door carved with the Alpha King's emblem, a stylized, crowned wolf's head. It swung open silently, revealing a chamber that defied her expectations. No dungeon, this. A roaring fire crackled in a massive hearth, casting dancing shadows on tapestries depicting ancient hunts and mythical beasts. Plush rugs covered the floor, and a large, carved wooden bed, draped with rich furs, dominated the room. A heavy oak table was laden with untouched food, roasted meats, fresh bread, and a goblet of wine. "Wait outside," the king instructed the guards, his voice lower, calmer now, yet no less commanding. They bowed and retreated, leaving Alara alone with him in this unexpected sanctuary. Theron walked to the hearth, his back to her, and stared into the flames. Silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Alara wrapped her arms around herself, acutely aware of her tattered dress, the grime on her skin, and the lingering scent of the pit. A strange mix of fear and a nascent sense of safety, unknown since her parents' deaths, stirred within her. Finally, he turned. His eyes, usually cold and imperious, now held a glint of bewilderment, perhaps even a flicker of awe. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to a heavy armchair near the fire. Alara sank into the plush cushions, the fire's warmth a stark contrast to the chill that had permeated her bones moments before. She waited, her heart thrumming against her ribs. "Explain yourself," Theron began, his voice stripped of its earlier rage, replaced by a cutting intensity. "What sorcery did you weave down there? Shadow has never bowed to anyone, not a single soul outside of my bloodline." He paced slowly, his gaze dissecting her. "Tell me everything. Do not lie. Do not omit. Your life, and perhaps more, depends on it." Alara swallowed hard, her throat dry. I don't know, Your Majesty," she began, her voice hoarse. "I was terrified. I expected the worst, but he didn't attack. He just nudged me, and then he bowed." She recounted the sensation of the wolf's fur against her skin, the mournful sound it made, the surprising gentleness of its actions. She saw the king's jaw clench as she spoke, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "You claim you did nothing?" he pressed, stopping before her, his shadow falling over her. "No hidden charms? No ancient spells? No whispered words?" Alara shook her head vehemently. "No, Your Majesty, I swear it. I have no such abilities. I am just Alara." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "A simple village girl, accused of a crime I didn't commit. Theron's eyes narrowed, searching her face. Shadow does not make mistakes. His instincts are ancient, infallible. He recognized something in you, something that even I, his king, could not perceive. He turned back to the fire, running a hand through his dark hair. This changes everything. Everything we thought we knew. His voice was a low murmur, more to himself than to her. Tell me about your family, Alara. Your parents, your lineage, every detail you can recall. Alara's mind reeled. The king's questions were no longer about her alleged treason, but about her very essence. The shift was palpable, dangerous, and inexplicably filled her with a terrifying hope. Whispers and suspicions. The scent of fear, thick and cloying, clung to the tapestries of the Stonehand Palace. It wasn't the primal terror of a hunt, but a more insidious dread, woven from whispers and the rustle of hurried skirts. Alara's survival had not been met with awe, but with a burgeoning resentment that festered in the shadowed alcoves and grand halls. Servants exchanged furtive glances, their voices dropping to hushed tones whenever the name Meadowlight was breathed. They spoke of sorcery, of unholy pacts that twisted the Alpha King's beast. The common folk, far from the royal court, saw it as a dark omen, a sign that the gods had turned their faces from the kingdom. Councillor Valerius Thorn, however, saw only opportunity. He moved through the agitated palace with a predatory calm, his smile a thin, cruel line. He encouraged the whispers, fanned the embers of suspicion into a roaring blaze. His agents, cloaked in the guise of concerned citizens, spread tales of Alara's lineage, twisting forgotten histories into venomous accusations. "The girl is a witch," one maid hissed to another, polishing a silver chalice with unnecessary vigor. "She bewitched the Alpha's shadow." The words, laced with fear, found fertile ground in the minds of those who had always found Alara's quiet grace unsettling. Meanwhile, in the hushed solitude of his private study, King Theron pored over ancient scrolls, their parchment brittle with age. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the heavy drapes, illuminating arcane symbols and faded script. He ignored the clamour outside, the faint hum of his agitated court. His mind was a labyrinth of questions, each turn leading deeper into the unknown. Shadow, his loyal, ferocious companion, had never bowed to anyone outside their direct bloodline. Never. Yet, the beast had knelt before Alara, its amber eyes reflecting a strange, undeniable reverence. Theron traced a gnarled finger over a passage detailing the Wolfkin, a forgotten lineage said to possess an innate connection to the primal magic of the land. A connection so profound it could command the very beasts of the forest. The texts were fragmented, many pages scorched or missing, as if deliberately erased. A chill prickled his skin. The council, particularly Thorn, had always been meticulous in their record-keeping, yet these vital historical accounts were conspicuously absent from the main archives. It was a deliberate excision, a gaping wound in their recorded past. He felt a grim certainty forming in his gut. Alara's connection to Shadow was not sorcery, but something far older and far more dangerous to those who sought to control the kingdom's narrative. Locked away in the king's private wing, Alara found the silence both a balm and a torment. The opulence of her temporary prison, silken sheets, rich tapestries, and a private balcony overlooking the palace gardens was a stark contrast to the rough stone of the pit. Yet, the whispers of the court still reached her, carried on the wind, seeping through the thick walls. She felt the weight of their fear, their resentment pressing in on her. Despite the palpable anger emanating from the palace, Elara found herself drawn to the king with an unsettling, complex pull. His sternness, the hard line of his jaw, the unwavering intensity of his gaze. These things should have instilled fear, but instead, they stirred a strange sense of familiarity. When he had interrogated her, his questions had been sharp, his voice low and resonant, yet beneath the interrogation, she sensed a searching, almost desperate curiosity. It wasn't the cold judgment of Thorn, but a deeper, more primal inquiry. She remembered the raw power that had surged through her in the pit, the way Shadow's wild heart had synchronized with her own. It was a connection that transcended words, a silent understanding that had bound them in that moment of desperate survival. And somehow, that primal connection now seemed to extend, in a muted, distant way, to the king himself. She felt the echoes of Shadow's deference in him, a strange, burgeoning recognition that defied logic. It was a dangerous feeling, this burgeoning trust for the man who had condemned her to death. Yet it took root in her heart, intertwining with her fear and her desperate need for answers. The palace might whisper of sorcery, but Elara felt a different kind of magic at play, one that was slowly, inexorably, binding her fate to the Alpha Kings. Shadow's warning. The heavy oak door of Elara's chambers creaked open, admitting a sliver of moonlight and the hushed whisper of the castle at rest. Elara, restless despite the late hour, was gazing out at the star-dusted sky, the iron bars of her window a constant reminder of her gilded cage. A figure slipped in, shrouded in the muted livery of a scullery maid, her head bowed. Elara stiffened, her senses suddenly on high alert. No maid was scheduled for this hour. "Can I help you?" Elara's voice was calm, though a tremor of unease traced her spine. The maid didn't respond, her movements unnaturally stiff as she shuffled closer. The air grew cold, prickling Elara's skin. A metallic glint caught the moonlight as the maid raised a hand, a small, wickedly sharp dagger emerging from the folds of her sleeve. Before Elara could even react, a low growl, deep and resonant, ripped through the silence of the room, vibrating through the very floorboards. It was a sound of ancient warning, primal fury. The maid froze, her eyes wide with terror. Shadow, a blur of obsidian fur and raw power, burst through the door, having torn it from its hinges with a single, furious swipe. His crimson eyes, usually a beacon of ancient wisdom, now blazed with unrestrained aggression. A guttural snarl rippled from his throat, a promise of swift and brutal retribution. The maid shrieked, dropping the dagger with a clatter that echoed in the sudden silence. Shadow lunged, not at the woman, but past her, blocking Elara's path to the door, effectively caging her behind his formidable bulk. The maid, her face ashen, stumbled backward, her gaze fixed on the alpha wolf. Her terror was palpable, a desperate animal fear that filled the room. With a choked cry, she scrambled away, a whimpering mess of limbs, and fled back into the shadowed corridor, leaving the splintered door a testament to Shadow's sudden arrival. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet. She stared at Shadow, his massive frame still rigid with protective fury. He turned his head slowly, his crimson eyes softening as they met hers, a silent question passing between them. He nudged her hand with his wet snout, a gesture of reassurance that spoke volumes. The scent of fear still clung to the air, a stark reminder of how close she had come. Down the corridor, Theron, roused by the cacophony, strode into the scene, his sword already half drawn. The sight of Shadow standing sentinel over a pale Elara, the broken door, and the discarded dagger on the floor painted a grim picture. His eyes narrowed, a cold fury settling in their depths. What happened? His voice was a low growl, echoing Shadow's own. Elara, her voice still trembling slightly, recounted the incident, her gaze darting between the shattered door and the alpha wolf who had saved her. Shadow remained by her side, a silent, unyielding guardian. Theron knelt, examining the dagger. It was common steel, but the hilt was engraved with a symbol he didn't recognize. He rose, his jaw tight. This wasn't a random act. Someone wants you silenced, Elara. His words were not a question, but a grim statement of fact. The implications settled heavily in the air. This was no longer just about Elara's innocence or guilt. It was about a deeper, more insidious plot. The court's whispers, Thorn's venomous accusations, they were all pieces of a carefully constructed trap. This assassination attempt solidified Theron's growing suspicion of a concerted effort to prevent Elara from revealing whatever truth she unknowingly carried. He looked at Elara, truly seeing her for a moment, the vulnerability beneath her resilience, the fear that still flickered in her eyes, and he saw Shadow, his loyal alpha, standing as a bulwark against the darkness. The primal connection he felt to Elara, the inexplicable pull that defied logic, surged anew, intertwining with a fierce, protective instinct. "Find her," Theron commanded the guards, who were now swarming the corridor, alerted by the commotion. "And question every servant. No one is to leave the castle." His voice was laced with an authority that brooked no defiance. Turning back to Elara, his gaze was intense, unwavering. "You will not be alone. Not for a moment. Not until I uncover who is behind this and why." His words were a vow, spoken with an unspoken weight of commitment. The attempt on Elara's life, rather than confirming her as a threat, had cemented his resolve to protect her. The wolf had chosen its kin, and by doing so, had bound the Alpha King to a destiny he was only just beginning to understand. The shadows of conspiracy were deepening, but so too was the unyielding bond forming between a condemned woman, a legendary wolf, and a king determined to unearth the truth. The Moon Whisperer. The scent of old parchment and dust filled Theron's private study, a familiar comfort that usually soothed his restless mind. Tonight, however, it only amplified the growing knot of unease in his gut. The assassination attempt on Elara had been brazen, almost reckless, confirming his suspicion that her very existence posed a threat to someone powerful. He stared at the ancient tome splayed across his heavy oak desk, its leather cover cracked and brittle, its pages filled with elegant faded script. Counselor Thorn had dismissed it as a collection of forgotten fables, a harmless relic. Theron now knew better. He traced a finger over a faded illustration depicting a woman standing beneath a crescent moon, her hands raised as if conjuring the very light from the sky. Her eyes, even in the stylized drawing, held a depth that mirrored Elara's. He had spent the last 2 days poring over these texts, cross-referencing genealogies, deciphering cryptic poems. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a mosaic far more intricate and dangerous than he could have imagined. Moon Whisperers, he murmured, the ancient name feeling strange on his tongue. A bloodline eradicated centuries ago, their memory systematically erased from official records. Their power, the text claimed, lay in their profound connection to the natural world, particularly the moon's cycles, and their ability to soothe even the wildest beasts. Shadow's unprecedented acceptance of Elara suddenly made chilling sense. The Alpha Wolf, the embodiment of their kingdom's wild heart, had recognized one of its own. A sudden, sharp knock startled him, and the study door creaked open. Elara stood there, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes wary. The guards had insisted she remain in her chambers after the attack, but her resilience, her quiet defiance, was a quality Theron was coming to admire. She clutched a mug of steaming tea, its warmth doing little to thaw the lingering chill of fear in her gaze. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice a soft murmur, I could not sleep." Theron gestured to the chair opposite his desk, its high back dwarfing her slender frame. He watched her settle, noting the faint tremor in her hands. The attack had shaken her, but not broken her. "Elara," he said, his voice softer than usual, "there are things you need to know." He pushed the open tome towards her, pointing to the illustration. Her brow furrowed, her gaze drifting over the image. "What is this?" she asked, a faint tremor in her voice. "This," Theron explained, his voice low and deliberate, "is a depiction of your ancestors, the Moon Whisperers." He watched her face, expecting confusion, perhaps disbelief. Instead, he saw a flicker of something else, recognition, a dawning comprehension that deepened the emerald hue of her eyes. "My family was just farmers," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if the words themselves were foreign to her. "Meadowlight, simple people." "Your recorded lineage, yes, but the truth is more complex. The Royal Council, centuries ago, sought to consolidate power. They saw the Moon Whisperers as a threat, their unique abilities too unpredictable, too connected to forces beyond their control. They orchestrated a purge, erasing your bloodline from history, scattering the survivors, forcing them into obscurity." Alara's breath hitched. She stared at the illustration, then at her own hands, as if seeing them anew. "What abilities?" The texts speak of a harmony with nature, a deep understanding of its rhythms, an innate ability to calm and influence animals, particularly wolves. The moon, they say, amplifies your gifts, connecting you to an ancient, primal wellspring of power. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Shadow recognized you, Elara. He wasn't just protecting a random woman. He was protecting his kin, a descendant of the very people who once walked hand in hand with his kind. A shiver ran through Elara. She thought of Shadow's piercing red eyes, the way he had nudged her, a silent command, the way he had stood between her and the abyss, between her and the assassin. It wasn't just instinct, it was ancient memory, a bond forged in a time long forgotten. A strange warmth began to spread through her chest, a subtle hum of energy she had never noticed before, a quiet awakening. The world outside, the rustling leaves, the distant cry of an owl, seemed to intensify, their whispers clearer, more profound. "But I don't feel anything," she said, though even as she spoke, a sense of burgeoning power, dormant for so long, stirred within her. It was a soft thrumming, like a deep chord plucked within her very bones. Theron leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Perhaps not yet, but it is there, and it is why someone wants you dead. Your existence, Elara, threatens to unravel a carefully constructed lie. It threatens to shift the balance of power in this kingdom, and it makes you incredibly dangerous." He watched her, a mixture of awe and trepidation in his own eyes. The girl he had condemned to death was not merely an innocent. She was a key, a living link to a forgotten past, a vessel for a power that could reshape their future. His protective instincts, already fierce, solidified into an unbreakable resolve. The Wolfkin was under his protection, and he would tear apart anyone who dared to touch her. A kingdom transformed. The great hall of Stonehenge Castle buzzed with an unprecedented tension. Every noble, knight, and counselor of the kingdom had been summoned, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The air, usually thick with the scent of beeswax and old parchment, now carried an electric charge, a collective holding of breath. Theron, seated on his obsidian throne, observed them, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Ilara stood beside him, a beacon of quiet defiance in a gown of midnight blue that contrasted starkly with her pale skin. Shadow, a silent, formidable presence, lay coiled at Theron's feet, its red eyes occasionally flicking towards the assembled court, a low, almost imperceptible rumble emanating from its chest. Counselor Thorn, usually a bastion of cool composure, shifted uncomfortably in his seat amongst the other council members. A faint sheen of sweat adorned his brow, and his fingers, normally drumming a steady rhythm, now picked nervously at the velvet armrest. He had attempted, subtly at first, then with increasing desperation, to dissuade the king from this public revelation. Theron's refusal had been absolute. "My loyal subjects," Theron's voice boomed, cutting through the murmuring like a blacksmith's hammer. The hall instantly fell silent, save for the crackling of the hearth fire. "You have been summoned today for a matter of paramount importance, one that will redefine the very foundation of our kingdom." He paused, letting his words hang in the heavy air. His eyes swept across the faces before him, lingering for a moment on Thorn's blanching features. Many weeks ago, a woman stood accused of treason. Condemned, she faced the execution pit. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Thorn's gaze darted to Ilara, then back to Theron, a tremor running through him. But fate, or perhaps a power far older than any of us, intervened. Theron gestured to Shadow, who lifted its massive head, its eyes burning like embers. My alpha wolf, Shadow, did not tear her apart as was expected. Instead, it acknowledged her. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Whispers, like a sudden gust of wind, erupted, then died again under Theron's stern glare. Shadow recognized her as Wolfkin, Theron continued, his voice gaining a resonant power. An unprecedented event in the annals of our history. This anomaly compelled me to investigate, to seek the truth behind what transpired. He fixed his gaze on the assembled council, his expression hardening. And the truth, my lords and ladies, is a bitter pill to swallow. He stepped down from the throne, moving to stand beside Ilara, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Shadow rose, positioning itself between Ilara and the frantic court, a low growl rumbling in its throat, a clear warning. For centuries, a great deception has been perpetuated by those who swore to protect this kingdom, Theron declared, his voice ringing with a cold fury. The royal council, in their greed and fear, orchestrated the eradication of an ancient and revered bloodline, the Moon Whisperers. The revelation hit the court like a physical blow. Gasps turned into outright exclamations of shock and disbelief. Faces paled and several nobles clutched at their chests. Thorn, however, had gone beyond pale. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with unmasked terror, his hands trembling visibly. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. "The Moon Whisperers," Theron explained, his voice echoing with the weight of history, were not witches, not sorcerers, but guardians. They possessed a profound connection to nature, an innate ability to communicate with animals, to mend the broken, and to soothe the wild. Their power was not one of conquest, but of harmony. Yet they were painted as a threat, their wisdom twisted into malevolence, their gifts into dark magic, all to consolidate power within the hands of a few. He turned to Elara, drawing her slightly forward. This woman, Elara Meadowlight, is a direct descendant of the Moon Whisperers. Her bloodline, thought extinguished, flows strong within her veins. It is this ancient power that Shadow recognized. It is this power that makes her wolf-kin. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum in which only the frantic thumping of hearts could be heard. The air crackled with a volatile mixture of fear, awe, and dawning comprehension. The implications were staggering, rewriting centuries of dogma, shattering the bedrock of their belief system. Thorn, now a picture of abject panic, finally found his voice, a reedy, desperate sound. This is madness, a trick, a fabrication, he stammered, scrambling to his feet. Your Majesty, you cannot believe such lies. Theron's eyes, cold and hard as flint, locked onto Thorn. Can I not, counselor? Or is it that you cannot afford for me to believe it? His voice was a low, dangerous growl. The records, carefully hidden away for centuries, speak volumes. The truth, Thorn, has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply buried. The other council members, their faces a mixture of horror and dawning dread, avoided Thorn's gaze. They knew. Theron knew they knew. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. The old guard, those who had benefited from the lie, felt the foundations of their authority crumble beneath them. Elara Meadowlight, Theron announced, his voice ringing with a new decree, is not a criminal. She is a symbol of a new era, a testament to the truth that always finds its way. The lies end today. The persecution ends today. We will not repeat the mistakes of the past. This kingdom will be transformed. Shadow let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that vibrated through the very stones of the castle, a primal affirmation of the Alpha King's pronouncement. The court, stunned and reeling, understood. The world they knew had just been irrevocably altered, the dawn of a new age. The collective gasp of the court still hung in the air, a physical manifestation of their shock. But Elara no longer felt its chill. The weight of centuries of lies had been lifted, replaced by an unfamiliar, potent lightness. She stood now not as the condemned, but as the harbinger of a new truth, beside King Theron. His hand, warm and strong, rested at the small of her back, a silent declaration of his protection and allegiance. The crimson robes of her past accusation felt like a distant nightmare, replaced by a simple, elegant gown of forest green, a gift from Theron, its color mirroring the ancient forests where the Moon Whisperers once found solace. Shadow, Theron's colossal wolf, lay coiled at their feet, its massive head resting on its paws, red eyes occasionally flicking open to gauge the reactions of the stunned nobles. Its presence was a constant, formidable reminder of the ancient bond that had saved Elara, an unspoken threat to anyone who dared to question the king's decree. The court, once brimming with self-assured power, now shifted uneasily. Councillor Thorn, his face a mask of barely contained fury, remained rooted in his spot, but the venomous gleam in his eyes had been tempered by a healthy dose of fear. Over the ensuing weeks, the initial shock gave way to a grudging acceptance, then, slowly, a blossoming curiosity. The whispers that followed Elara through the palace halls transformed. No longer were they hushed accusations of treason, but murmured questions about her lineage, her gifts, and the dawn of a forgotten magic. Theron, with an unyielding resolve, began the arduous task of dismantling the old power structures. He replaced counselors implicated in the Moon Whisperer's eradication with those who showed genuine loyalty to him and, more importantly, an openness to the truth. Royal decrees, once carved in stone by the council, now bore Theron's seal alone, a testament to his absolute authority. Elara, for her part, did not hide. She walked with a newfound grace, her gaze steady and unwavering. Theron's private wing, once her gilded cage, became her sanctuary, a place where she began to explore the faint echoes of her inherited abilities. Shadow was her constant companion. The magnificent wolf seemed to understand her nascent struggles, nudging her hand with its wet snout when frustration threatened to overwhelm her, its low growl a comforting rumble against her side. One crisp autumn morning, a delegation from the outer villages arrived, their faces etched with worry. A strange blight had descended upon their crops, turning fertile fields to withered husks. The court sorcerers, bound by archaic texts and traditional incantations, had been powerless. Theron, after a tense exchange with his advisors, turned to Elara. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble, "will you try?" A ripple went through the gathered nobles. This was it, the true test. Elara felt a tremor of apprehension, but beneath it, a surge of fierce determination. She nodded, her gaze meeting Theron's with a silent promise. Flanked by Shadow, whose red eyes scanned the anxious faces, Elara rode to the afflicted village. The air grew heavy with despair as they approached the blighted fields. The once vibrant green stalks were now brittle, brown skeletons reaching towards a sun that offered no solace. Elara dismounted, her boots sinking slightly into the dry, cracked earth. She closed her eyes, reaching out with a part of herself she was only just discovering, a deep, primal connection to the very lifeblood of the land. She felt a faint hum, a wounded whisper beneath the soil. Placing her hands flat on the barren ground, Elara focused. A soft silver luminescence began to emanate from her fingertips, spreading slowly, like dew across a spiderweb, over the parched earth. Shadow watched, utterly still, its eyes fixed on her. The villagers, at first skeptical, then awestruck, fell silent. A faint green shimmer began to emerge from the blackened stalks, tentative at first, then stronger, pushing through the withered husks. A collective gasp rose from the villagers as new, vibrant green leaves unfurled before their very eyes. The air, once heavy with decay, now carried the faint, sweet scent of rejuvenation. When Elara finally withdrew her hands, exhausted but exhilarated, a wave of cheers erupted. The villagers, weeping with relief, knelt before her, not in deference to a queen, but in gratitude to a miracle. Shadow let out a soft whine, nudging her hand. Returning to the palace, the atmosphere was transformed. The grudging acceptance had solidified into genuine respect, even admiration. Elara, once the outcast, was now the beacon of hope, the living embodiment of the new age Theron had prophesied. The path ahead was long, fraught with lingering shadows, but as Elara stood on the balcony overlooking a kingdom that was slowly, irrevocably changing, she knew one thing. With Theron and Shadow by her side, she was ready. The dawn had truly broken. Whispers of peace. The scent of freshly tilled earth mingled with the sweet perfume of blooming moon petal, a fragrance that had been all but forgotten until Elara's touch revived it. She knelt in a sun-drenched field, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of a young shoot. Beside her, King Theron observed, his usual stern expression softened by a flicker of admiration. The fields, once barren and choked with blight, now promised a bountiful harvest, a testament to the quiet power that flowed through Elara. The old ways held a deeper truth than we allowed ourselves to remember, Theron mused, his voice a low rumble. He watched the villagers, no longer burdened by despair, working alongside Elara, learning the ancient songs and chants that coaxed life from the soil. Trust, a fragile thing, was slowly being rewoven into the fabric of their lives, thread by painstaking thread. Elara rose, brushing soil from her hands. It's not just the magic, Theron. It's the understanding, the connection. We were taught to dominate, not to cooperate with the land. Her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a serene light. Shadow, always near, nudged her hand with its massive head, its crimson eyes reflecting the vibrant green of the new growth. The wolf's presence was no longer a harbinger of dread, but a symbol of protection and profound ancient wisdom. The reintroduction of ancient magic was a gradual process, met with a mix of awe and lingering apprehension. Theron, however, was unwavering. He established academies where the Moon Whisperer traditions were taught alongside conventional sciences, bridging the chasm of centuries of suppression. He personally oversaw the curriculum, ensuring that the true history of his kingdom, with all its shadowed corners, was finally brought to light. Elara, initially hesitant, found her voice as a teacher, her gentle guidance empowering others to discover their own latent connections to the land and the subtle currents of the world. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Elara stood with Theron on the castle battlements. Below, the kingdom hummed with a renewed vitality. Lights twinkled in the distance, no longer just the harsh glow of watchtowers, but the warm invitation of homes and newly opened markets. The oppressive silence that had once hung over the capital was replaced by the distant murmur of laughter and music. "They are beginning to see," Theron said, his gaze sweeping across his domain. "Not just the magic, but the potential. The true strength that lay dormant within us all." He turned to Elara, his eyes, usually so guarded, holding a rare vulnerability. "You showed them, Elara. You showed me." A shiver, not of cold, but of something profound, traced its way down Elara's spine. The air between them crackled with an unspoken intensity, a connection that deepened with each shared triumph, each quiet moment. Shadow, ever watchful, settled at their feet, its massive body a silent sentinel. The royal court, once a viper's nest of intrigue and ambition, was slowly transforming. Theron, with Elara's counsel, had weeded out the most corrupt elements, replacing them with individuals who prioritized the well-being of the kingdom over personal gain. The old noble houses, stripped of their undeserved power, either adapted or faded into obscurity. The people, once disenfranchised, now had a voice, their concerns heard and addressed. The most striking change was the return of the seasonal festivals, once banned as pagan rituals. The spring equinox, a celebration of rebirth and renewal, was held with unprecedented fervor. Elara, dressed in a gown woven with moon petal embroidery, led the procession, her voice clear and resonant as she sang the ancient hymns to the land. Theron, walking beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back, felt a surge of pride and a fierce protectiveness. This was the kingdom he had always strived for, a kingdom of balance, of truth, and of hope. The fear that had once defined their interactions had receded, replaced by a growing understanding, a nascent trust that transcended their initial violent meeting. Elara, once a condemned prisoner, was now a beacon, her presence a constant reminder of the fragile line between justice and tyranny. Theron, once a king isolated by the weight of his crown, now found a confidant, a partner whose intuition and wisdom complemented his own strength. The future of the kingdom stretched before them, a tapestry still being woven, but now vibrant with promise. The whispers of peace, once a distant dream, now echoed through the valleys and over the mountains, carried on the wind, a testament to the girl who had fallen into the execution pit and emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of a new dawn.